I've been guarding that item for almost 4 decades. And I think that's why Kelly asked me to introduce Norma.
We're both old.
Yeah. If you notice, every time she introduces herself, one of her claims to veracity or validity is that she's been doing this forever. Just a quick reference to 3 years ago when this initiative started, we talked about a new paradigm. And this is, fortunately, my second time to talk to hear this lady. And she just made me feel guilty, primarily. Because, you know, I always, for all these years, decades, of being a guardian ad litem, is, well, Mom, if you want to see the kid,
get busy, do the plan.
But the subcommittee of the Commission on Children had her come out, and she told us, maybe we're going to think about the kid we're representing first. And with that, I give you Norma.
That's the other problem with being mature. Can't get friggin' lids off. I don't know when these will get out to all of you, but I just got one from Vicki Wentz, and it's guidelines for parenting times for children in out-of-home care. It's short. That's another thing that's really nice. It's not 19 pages, which some of them ended up being. It's outstanding. And they set the stage in here for the minimum times to be for birth to 18 months, 5 times a week, and daily visits are optional. Age 18 months to 3 years, 4 times a week. The lowest it goes down to is twice a week for teenagers, 14 to 19. Very good material in here, and I wanted to tell you that. I was very pleased to see, because sometimes it's hard. Not that I would bemoan my fate of being married to a lawyer, but they can have difficulty always negotiating. But there were a lot of people who worked on that who were very dedicated, and I think it's outstanding what they came up with. I recognize some of you from earlier, but if we have anybody new that had, I'm losing my voice, if we have anybody new that had any comments or questions from the presentation yesterday, who hasn't been part of anything, any of the events today, I'd be glad to take a question or two really quick, or a comment. You may just decide you think it's stupid and you disagree, and that's okay. Anyone at all? Anyone have a question to raise? Comment?
This new approach that you're talking about does not include incest or sex offenders.
That's not exactly the way I consider sex offenders, but we won't go in there. No. The group that was there in my second presentation this morning, we did not get totally, I'm glad you raised that, I wanted to spend a minute. I do not believe at any time should sex offenders be in contact with the children who either they have offended against or other children that live in the home. They should have no contact with any of those people once the children come into care. It is different. It is very different. Sex abuse, we tried to make it look like physical abuse and neglect for several years. And with physical abuse and neglect, that's a symptom. When I see physical abuse, it's a symptom of something else. When I see neglect, it's a symptom of something else, often psychological issues, depression, any of those things. With sexual predators, it is a compulsive, overriding need to have sexual involvement with children at different ages. It is progressive. It is not curable. It can be manageable, but the first thing you need is an admission. Second thing you need is a lifetime addiction plan, and usually including that person not be allowed to be alone around children again. So that says to me, I'm only going to do it for a child whose therapist sees that as a therapeutic necessity, and it would be done in a therapist's office. Does that make sense? Non-offending parents I'm going to support. Go work real hard to kind of bring them over to the right side and have them recognize the child's telling the truth. But I'm not going to entertain offenders. Someone here had a question. Then go.
So when I look at what you're saying, what about siblings?
Ah, good. It depends. Back to my two favorite words. I know that one thing we have done historically is tried to make ways for children. There's a chair up here, and there's one right here. Oh, it's saved. That's okay. You can all sit on each other's lap up here. Oh, yeah, we have 3 chairs back here that, let me get rid of this. Gentlemen, if there's room, if you need another chair, come get this one. All right. I'll just even pull this one over here for someone to relax in. Where was I? Siblings. We have for years taken a treatment model that often works with adults and sometimes tried to apply it to adolescent offenders of various kinds. And what we found is it doesn't work. And so we're not sure how many of these kids we're now citing as offenders are truly the same offenders we're dealing with at 30 or 35. There isn't enough evidence-based research to give us a good look at that. There are those kids who are just feeling inadequate and bad self-esteem, and it's, I'll never get a date with a girl anyway, so can I coerce my little sister to take her clothes off? It may be one of those immature things of, let's see what happens if we all feel each other's penises. That's when I want to be real careful. Does that make sense to you? But if there's a chance for rehabbing and putting the kid back at home, I'm going to work real hard. I want a good sexual abuse therapist who deals with adolescents to be part of that planning. I want a good assessment. Because we know there are many kids, I hate to say it, who offend in adolescence who never offend as adults. And so I don't want to say a general statement. I'd rather have a good assessment. Does that make sense? Okay. And some kids are offenders because many of our adult offenders start as adolescents. So we need to do a lot more. There needs to be a lot more money spent on research in that area. Any other quick questions from what we've done before? All right, let's take a look at nuts and bolts. And since I had a lot of folks come to all of the sessions, I don't want to repeat, so I'm going to skip some slides for many of you who've been to the other sessions and get right down to where we want to be with this. I have to figure out how to work it first. Let's go there. Isn't that amazing? Questions, instead of why do you see your family, think about this. Do you only see your children in a single room located in a public building for an unending amount of time? Just think about what we've done. And I'm going to make a wild assumption, and that is all of you, if you parent, you're adequate parents. How about, do you play games with your children for at least 2 hours at a time? Now, I did it with my teenagers, time to play rummy, and they killed me every time we played. I love it. But when they were 3, when they were 4, just think about it. And do you interact with your children by being face-to-face with them up this close for at least 2 hours at a time? How about adolescents? How many of you would even want to with adolescents? Said adolescents only talk twice a day. When they're demanding they need to go somewhere and you're standing in their way, or at 11:30 at night when they get off the fast food shift they just worked. Yeah. And most of us really would rather not know what they're thinking. So again, and this big one really hit me when I came up with it. Do you correct your children in front of perfect strangers? I remember when my kids were little, I tried not even to correct them when we were out in public. I wanted to just kind of control the situation there and deal with them when they were not embarrassed and all of that in addition. Now, doesn't that look like what we ask our families with real minimum skills sometimes, and fear and angst and addiction issues to do every time they see their children? I'm not sure I would come. I remember as a baby worker, I thought, I would always come see my children. I'm a good parent. I would never not see my children. And then a few months into my first job in child protection, after my crazy visit with the half-human, I saw a worker come to the room where a parent and child were visiting and go in and say that it was time for the child to go. And the child, who was 3, jumped in her mother's arms and began screaming and crying and grabbing onto her neck and holding her to the mother, almost couldn't breathe, and was jumping and crying against her and screaming, "No, Mommy, no, Mommy, no, Mommy, no, no, no," till she started vomiting. And the mom's trying to gently move her away and push her back, and the workers behind her pulling her this way to get her away. I watched it transpire and I thought, I will never come and see my children. Why would I do that to them? That has to be the most awful thing that a human being ever does to something or someone they love. So suddenly, it made sense to me that a lot of what we did back then was utter insanity. And so I want us to look at some things we want to guard against. And the first thing is all of this. We need to change it. We need to not have this happen. Now, we need to have a parent feel solid and comfortable. That's why I'm going to meet with the parent before the family contact and figure out what we're going to accomplish today, what we're going to be doing, how hard we're going to be working with things. And I'm going to meet afterwards with them so that they don't leave thinking it was a bad time. I don't want them to see me in court 6 months from now telling all the errors and judgment they made. I need a relationship too badly. Whoop, went backwards. I'll do that. I'm in the... Again, one of the things that's critical, we need the least restrictive, most family-like environment. So we don't need to be at the office. McDonald's is better. If there's a mall in your town that has a play area, that's better. The park, the skating rink, Chuck E. Cheese, any of those are better environments than ever in some sort of sterile office environment, especially never ever the place that they left from when they were separated. Never want to be back there and never want to have my parent leave me there again. They need to be doing activities they would normally use to parent. How will we ever know stress if all they're doing is sitting there? Of course, for me, that would be far more stress. But isn't it appropriate? Don't most people parent preschoolers while they're getting their lunch together, while they're talking, making sure that kids are not getting in trouble? What about doing an arts and crafts activity? What about finger painting? Those are things you do enter into with your kid, and they're time limited. What about giving your kid a bath? That's why I love the Family Contact Center in Des Moines. They have 3 bathrooms. So parents go in and have their kids there for half a day, and they can give them a bath, put them down for a nap. Sometimes foster parents will drop the kid off on the way to work. The birth parent is there. They'll give them their morning bath, get them in their clothes, fix them breakfast. That's when you see real people. So we need to think about those things. And again, parents taking full responsibility for their safety. I'm going to really raise issue if mom takes a 2-year-old, puts them in the tub, starts to fill it with water, and walks out of the bathroom. Doesn't mean I'm not going to be watching, but I want to stop mom and say, I have a safety issue. Talk to me about why you left the baby in the room. What were you thinking? And she may say, I thought it was okay, the water wasn't that high. A lot of people make terrible mistakes when they take care of children. Many, many children, over half, 3/4 of the kids that are burned by hot water, it's an accident because parents don't realize what feels warm or slightly hot to me is enough to put a 2nd-degree burn on a child. We need to teach, but not necessarily assume the parent was being lazy or irresponsible. So I need to ask those questions. We're going to skip this one. We went through this certainly yesterday. Whoop. Now, agencies need to change almost in reverse every way they've done family contacts up till now. That's the first thing. It's okay to do that, you know? We didn't know the right answer. When I tell you that my daughter came to us 2 days after her 7th birthday for adoption, and we were her 5th placement, I didn't even think that was unusual. You do the best you can with what you know. When you know more, you do better. So we need to just stop and say, we have been engaging in what can be very futile endeavors, and we need to stop doing it. This is a great opportunity. Economics are terrible. So change what we do. And again, family permanency is our issue, not rewards and punishment. But permanency is the only goal in AFSVA. There isn't a goal of reunification. There's a pathway. There's a pathway for permanency in your own family or with a significant other. There's a pathway for adoption, permanent placement outside the home. Now, I always liked the fact, and that was my biggest argument when I was working with the senator on the bill, was PPLA. Planned Permanent Living Arrangement. That's the only thing I would have excluded. Totally. What I found was that they put that in there when people weren't ambitious enough to find permanent homes. And I hate to say it, but I've seen kids at age 7 PPLA. Again, we need to think about that. That's not permanency. The average child who spends their first 12 years in one foster home will move an average of 6 more times before they're 18. It's that teenager issue. And our approach has to be, how often can you come and how can I get you here? And you know what? There's no rule against this as a worker. I can ask that anytime I get involved in a case. A guardian can ask it. GLs should be asking this. CASAs and parents' lawyers should be asking this. Instead of going the opposite direction. This morning we did the basic elements, so I won't spend time on those. I'm going to ask anyone who wasn't in that workshop to see if you have questions about any of the pieces. This is a separate plan. Iowa has a good plan model. You all will have my email. Wisconsin has a good plan. And they do an initial plan, and they do what I called this morning drive-by visits, kind of just, it's 48 hours, let's have a visit. And then they do an initial plan, which is just sort of the general information here and why the child was out, what were the risk issues. And then in about 4 to 6 weeks, they write a plan that's going to last into the middle phase of family contact. So Iowa has a great plan. They've thought it through a lot, and copies of that can be available to you. And I'm sure anyone at Court Improvement has that one. Again, the one from Wisconsin is very good and talks a lot about observations around attachment. So you could also have access to that one. You just need to email me and I can get a copy to you. Because it's separate, and guess what? It's journalized separately in the court. Because I want to be able to testify to that on a regular basis whenever I'm in a court hearing. Because it's going to show more evidential information than the case plan will, generally. Questions or reactions to the plan? How do I get children ready for contact? So even at the first beginning pieces, I need to start looking at the best way to keep kids safe and sane during what can be a psychotic opportunity. First of all, I need to make sure the kid has every piece of the information about removal. This is why every child needs a life book. And the removing worker in every case situation must write the story of the removal at a developmentally appropriate level. That needs to be in that child's life book and needs to be something that child will take with them always, even if they don't return home. It is not the foster parent's role. It is not the ongoing worker's role. It's not the adoption worker's role. And it's certainly not the new adoptive parent's role to tell that story. That's something the child needs to be able to read within the first few days of placement. We need to make sure we're totally respecting the family, the heritage, the history of that particular child. We need to know enough about the family. We can also talk about some strengths that we may have noticed in the way the parent handled the removal, etc. We also need to respect that child's defenses. Some kids, it takes 4 or 5 times of discussion, so don't be angry if it occurs, to talk about why you can't go with your parent this time. Our granddaughter's been with us almost 6 years, and she has some mental health issues that are fairly significant, but we probably tell her 3 times each time before mom visits why she can't go with her. And we may still be doing that 3 years from now. Doesn't mean at the end of the visit she's not going to ask to go. And we have to understand it takes a long time to work out that issue. We also need to help the child understand what happened, why it happened, and look ahead to the best of the ability to the future. What good things are going for this child now? Maybe it's a new school. Maybe it's the puppy at the foster parent's house. Maybe it's living with Aunt Susan and my 2 cousins. Find something that sustains that child in the future. That's a critical piece for that kid. And then start sibling contact. How many of you in this room have siblings? Okay. How many in your whole life ever only saw your siblings with your parents present? We do that to our kids all the time, don't we? Foster kids. We need to stop it. Kids need to have time to be together, and they need to have time to be entertained. It's worth paying the extra per diem to assure those kids do picnics together, weekends together, other activities. That has to be part of a nuts and bolts in your planning. How do we have sibling contact? We need to make sure there are places to address the placement issues. This is for the child. Where can the child talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly? Where can the child talk about visits? I had a worker come up and talk to me. No, it wasn't. It was a CASA who said she had a teenager, and this was the third time this child had gone to placement. And she said, I'm feeling really uncomfortable because I don't know what to say. But the child has said, look, I'm 15. I've had enough. I'm tired of walking in the door every night after school and wondering if my mom has OD'd and is dead in the living room. I'm tired of never being able to bring a friend home because you don't know what condition the house or my mother's in. I'm tired of never being able to go away for an evening because if I ask her when she's sober, she remembers and says, yes, you can go. And then when she's drunk, she's so mean, she won't let me out of the house and I crawl out the back window. I don't want to see her. I don't want to have contact. I want another family. This kid needs a place to talk about that issue, not just therapy. He needs to know somebody's hearing his comments. The worker has decided, because he said, I want you to tell my mom because I can't. She's hoping to get him to write a letter to tell mom that very thing. So we need to think about, we need to make sure a child has the ability to address those issues. And then to pay attention to their desires and concerns about reunification. Some kids who've been particularly through abuse and neglect, when they finally feel empowered, are just angry at their parents. I don't want to ever see my parent again. I'm not going home. It'll just be another round. We need to work through those issues. We can't deny them and say, oh, you'll feel different tomorrow, things will be better. Those all need to be dealt with in terms of nuts and bolts of planning if we're going to change family contact. We need to understand what we have to do in preparing a child for the visit. And we might even write this out. What about preoccupation with details? I remember driving a 3-year-old to a visit. And we were going to an independent foster home because that's where the mom was coming and I was taking the child. And I'm telling her all about the house and the neighborhood, so I was being so good at preparing. And the child's sitting there and she suddenly gets this panicked look on her face and she said, I have to ask a question. I said, okay, sweetie, what's wrong? She said, do they have a potty? I just learned to use the potty. And if there's not a potty there, what will I do? I didn't even think about it. Of course they had a bathroom. That was part of being a foster parent. You had to have an indoor bathroom. I couldn't think like a kid. That was her major concern. Also, we need to help kids with calendars. School-age kids are good at that. They love calendars. Younger kids, after Sesame Street, after nap and lunchtime. When Billy gets home from school, you go to see your mommy. All of those things can be very helpful for kids to retain and be able to plan. Then, there are concerns about personal safety. Just realized a typo. How do we take care of that? How do we help them feel safe? If we're at the mall, what do I do? If we're at another place that I'm not used to going to, now if we're at Aunt Susan's, you just find Aunt Susan. That's all you need to do and tell her there's a problem. If we're at the Family Contact Center, you leave the room, go to the bathroom or whatever you need to do and come find a grown-up. But we need to have a plan in place for kids who are concerned. And then prepare the child to feel bad after the contact. Sometimes it hurts so bad in your stomach that you think you're going to throw up. Sometimes you just feel bad all over in your body. It's hard. It's okay to feel that way. Suddenly I don't have to scream and yell because it's okay to feel really bad. But we need to prepare that child for that, even at a very young age. Because remember, I think I said yesterday, loss is the greatest emotional trauma any human being ever experiences. And our kids are not prepared for those kinds of losses if they've not come out before. And then, this is the time to talk about some of the contact fantasies. My mommy told me she was going to bring me a pair of roller skates when she comes to see me this time. We immediately assumed the parents made that promise. There they go, promising things they can't possibly do for the kids. Maybe they didn't promise it. Kids create great fantasies. So we need to check, and we can check with mom. But can we figure out a way to talk to the child about not getting roller skates?
What's your recommendation on how far ahead of time we should be preparing the kids for visits?
I think you're right. I think it's preparing depending on ages. Certainly preschoolers, which is about the first group you can give real talking to. Toddlers, it's very difficult. But preschoolers, you probably you're going to have to do the work right before the visit again anyway. But you may start to talk. Most of my friends who did preschoolers put stickers up every day. And when you got to a black space on the calendar, that's when it was going to happen. So they would do the sticker thing on the calendar and then talk a little bit about mom each of those days, but you're going to have to do it again right before. School-age kids can usually retain. I'm more concerned about their personal safety, some of the fantasies they've created. Then with adolescents, they're pretty much in control. We had an adolescent come to our home who the worker had gone out and called me. I went to train up there, and they asked me if I'd take this kid home. So I went home, and my husband ordered me never to train again. But I went up, and the girl was in care, and the worker said, it is the most dysfunctional family I've ever seen in my life, bar none. Totally sexually inappropriate in every dimension, and not low functioning in any way. So of course I said, oh, I've seen it all. I have all this experience. It's not going to be a problem. We went out to the house. It was the weirdest, most disturbed family I have ever seen. I get cold chills saying it out loud. Give you a couple of examples. She had a baby when she was 12 by her brother. And both grandparents were furious when the baby was removed because, after all, it's a double grandchild. Does that give you a clue? Let me tell you, it's downhill from there. Dad had he was stepdad. He had 3 previous convictions on perping. All legitimate, I'm absolutely sure. Grandpa, who had sexually abused the mother, had a hospital bed in the living room, and he would lay in there naked and then flash everybody. I mean, it all happened in one interview. And so dysfunction was big time. So I now know that I don't ever take that away from workers. When they say it, they mean it. So we took her home, and I said, for the last 4 years, she left home at 12 and the baby was born. No one had known anything before then. And then she went to 4 placements where she was sexually abused, twice in residential and twice in foster care, till she came to our house. And we decided to take her, and I said, but we have a problem here. You've let her go home for Sunday afternoons for the past 4 years for visits. Yeah. I said, well, right now she's figuring on moving home at the end of her stay. She is totally fixated on it, never thought anything different. We need her to do a weekend at home. Oh, she will get sexually abused. And nobody abuses on Sunday afternoons from noon till 7? Get over it. we can finally convince them. So we did about 2 days of work with her, longer than that, probably 4 or 5, on how to keep yourself safe when you go home. We had 3 other foster parents. She had their phone numbers, so she could call if anything inappropriate started. Both workers, the supervisor and the direct worker, was going to be on call that whole weekend and step in if anything inappropriate started. She's ready to go. I'm going to take her to the bus, walk in, and I said, "Carrie, you ready?" She said, "Yeah, I think I'm ready." And I had done a whole thing around sexual inappropriate stuff. And she said, "I think it's going to be a good time or I may be done." I said, "Okay, girlfriend." She said, "Look." She went over and opened her suitcase, and she had one of my heaviest iron skillets in it. She looked at me and she said, "If he tries anything, I'm going to beat him to death with it." I said, "Sounds like you're ready to the weekend for me, so come on." She made 2 weekend trips home. Nothing happened. And after that, she said, "I will never move back there. They were friggin' crazy." Yeah. The issue is, sometimes you take that kind of risk because the alternative is this person moving home and getting caught in that whole insanity. And while, after living with us a year, she started, I've lost track of her now, but for a while she rode with truckers across the country. That's better than moving back there. I really can't tell you, that sounds awful, but that's 4 steps above where she'd been. The issue is, that's a rarity, but kids need to be prepared for crisis situations. Because you know what? Some of our kids may go home and they also may need to protect themselves later down the road as they get older from possible abuse or neglect. So we need to be clear about it. I need to ask foster parents anytime I'm looking to place a child or anytime foster parents are involved, whatever our role is, these questions, and we need answers. How do you value parent and child relationships? How important are these to you? Will you allow visits in your home? It's funny, in the earlier class today when somebody was saying, "I don't have a foster parent that would ever do that," and the woman across the way said, "I've been a foster parent for 20 years. I've had most all visits in my home." We need to ask people directly rather than make assumptions. We need to supervise visits. Are they willing to help with that in their own home? Are they willing to document information when they see it going on? I'm not asking you to draw a conclusion, but document behaviors. What about transportation? Are you willing to help prepare the child for contact? That doesn't even mean you're going to go meet anybody. And can you help parents later down the road provide safe homes for their children? Those questions should be asked before people are approved. But if they haven't been, we need to be asking them even when we're starting visits at a more formal location. And I think we have to be ready to give information to people when they need our help, especially if CASAs are involved and they're in homes or visiting with parents. This is an opportunity to give some information. I want to know from the foster family, when's the best time for contact? You know, if I did obviously all the visits in our home, but if you called and told me I had to drive Johnny down on Wednesdays and Mondays at 3 o'clock and I had to wait on them, pick him back up at 5 o'clock, I wouldn't have done it. So I'd have been unresponsive and negative. But I had 3 other girls taking dance lessons during that time, and I had to make 2 trips to separate schools. I couldn't do that. We often don't ask the second question. We assume people aren't cooperative. So I would have loved it if it could have been earlier and the kid could have just stayed for that whole time till I got the last kid at dance class. But we need to ask. What kind of commitments do both birth parents and foster parents have? How can we get around some of those? And again, guardians and parents attorneys need to be asking some of these things of their parents. Why and what is the child saying anything about the contact? Again, we need to dig deeper. What aspects of the conduct should be recorded in order to look at better case planning? What pieces need to be on the list for a better family contact plan when we begin to do those visits from the foster parent's perspective? And then last, we need to be sure that we're helping foster parents feel okay. They're going to feel awkward. They're going to be wanting to comfort the children and yet not interfere with the parent. What kind of rules can we set with adults in the room that can happen? You're going to have maybe an angry parent. That's okay. We can work through that. If I feel terrible and feel like a failure, I have to pick on the person who's going to be least likely to keep me from seeing my children. That's the foster parent.
I've also found that in terms of just dealing with the foster parent, a simple, I have to come see you for whatever reason. Will this time be convenient for you?
Oh, thank
So
you.
100 miles.
Yes. Yes. And again, while unannounced visits may work for a lot of people, you need to be sure that the parent's going to be there. I can remember getting a brand new worker who called and said, I want to come see you tomorrow afternoon. And I said, good, that's a great arrangement. She said, I came yesterday. I said, did I forget something? I didn't realize. No, I just came up and knocked on the door. I said, well, I wasn't here. She said, I know, your kids wouldn't let me in. I said, you're darn right they wouldn't. She said, I had my ID, and I said, so what? The issue is, what are we doing here in disrespect? Very clear. And then, what about a parent who drinks or could get drunk? How do you feel about that? I'm not asking to have a visit in the home yet. I just need to know how people are reacting to some of these things. Or the sadness for the child at the end of the contact. We need to think about those things and have some ways to talk to foster parents about it. Because really, they're usually the ones left alone with the outcome from the visit. And we don't think that way. How do we get parents ready to do contact? I think this is where we'd really drop in some honest information. First of all, what do I have to do differently in order for my child to go home? What has to change and why? I still, on rare occasions, and I read lots of case plans every year. We write crappy case plans. And I see get a GED for a parent's case plan. Now, I can only imagine that was written because when the parent was away getting a GED, they didn't have time to get angry and therefore wouldn't physically abuse the child, right? It's not a plan. The issue is, what do I have to change? And I'm going to tell you what I'm going to be looking for when you have family contact. That's critical. I'm going to tell you what I'm looking for. If I see it, you'll get this. If I don't see it, afterwards we'll talk about how we can practice it. I don't need to catch my families. I'm smarter than that. Again, the parents should be allowed to build on their strengths. What do you already do well? What are the things? And I'm going to look back over conversations I've had with the parent. Maybe I had the case open a little while before the kid came into care. Maybe the fact that mother was home at least every day when the kids got home from school. That's a strength. We need to build on that opportunity. And then once we get to know them, we need to talk to parents, and this includes attorneys, around why have you been doing that behavior? Where are the clues here that's going to help you change it? Why are you doing it? And then we should ask parents who they'd like to have as part of the contact. And again, I may really balk at boyfriend who was met at the bar last night. But if it's a friend down the street, if it's somebody the kids have played with, those may be at some point people that I'm going to include. And I want the parent to make a plan in the contact. What kinds of things are we going to do? And I'm going to help you make sure it happens. So again, those are some of the simple things that are nuts and bolts to making this work effectively. We've got to be more actively engaged in family contact. The critical issue is, it is a much more evidence-based opportunity to make judgments on in court than 99% of the case plans you read. I think I shared about the family that killed their children, and they had actually completed 2 parenting classes. What good did that do? Again. We talked earlier. These are things that we need to be putting in the plan. How well does this child take care of themselves? How well is this kid easily occupied and entertained? So we need to make sure we're documenting that and listening. I want to talk to school teachers. I want to talk as a worker to clubs or other things the kids may have been in, grandparents, other relatives. What does this kid have going for him that says, I might be able to leave this kid unsupervised for short periods of time without dangerous results? Again, we talked earlier, I need to document the parent's ability and willingness to get help. The kid I sent home with the iron skillet, I knew she'd have to take control. There wasn't anyone in that house that didn't engage in inappropriate sexual activity. Nobody was going to say stop it. And then I want to really talk about the request for or reactions to visits. That's important. It may mean a power issue. It may mean that we miss something entirely. I have a video that's pretty gross, and it's called Fred the Pedophile. And this is a pedophile who is in treatment, but for several years as his service, he goes to child welfare workers, juvenile court judges, police departments, and talks about what makes up a pedophile. And he had already spent several years in prison. I think he could count 94 victims, his own children, all of that. And he said, you folks who work in the court or child protection, why would you ever give a pedophile an opportunity to visit? I wanted to say, I don't want to hear what he's going to say. He said, because, he said, every pedophile has magic words in their repertoire. Magic words could be Merry Christmas. Magic words could be say, hey, you look cute in that dress today. That means we're going to have sex tonight. Magic words may not have any meaning for anyone else but my victim or other children in the family who haven't been victimized. So I come to your visit and I wear a Depends, and all I have to do is sit in the visit and say those words to the little girl, and say them every time she gets near me. And you'll begin to see her get anxious and distressed and maybe even cry. I have an orgasm, you don't even know it, and I leave the visit and she's in ruins. Yeah. We need to recognize that, so you can imagine a kid who may be having those visits because we didn't know he was victimizing her. That's not why we were involved. So we need to be very sure we're following up those anxieties and asking the right questions, Because remember, sexual abuse becomes much less public than either of physical abuse or neglect. And we need to be sure we're staying on top of that with our kids. Also, I need to understand, is there chaos between partners, argument between mom and grandma, fights inside the family? Is there divided loyalty? Because that's going to affect the places I put in for visits. It may affect who sees whom when. It may mean that I think they need to be out and about, because if they go home, stepdad's going to show up at the front door. There's no criminal action on him, and he's going to make everybody's life miserable. I need to know that stuff. Another one, and I believe this handout is in your flash drive, is Vera Fahlberg did an absolute excellent developmentally appropriate activities for children 0 to 18 about what they're accomplishing with them, how important they are to be used, and what's the age group that's appropriate. That's the other thing I need to know for visits, because again, I'm looking at kids who in their 4 developmental stages may be cognitive, like right on target. They're decent students, they get B's and C's, they're good students. Physically, they may be developmentally appropriate physically. They've got the right build, the right height, the right weight. I will guarantee you that virtually 100% of our kids are significantly delayed socially and emotionally as victims of abuse and neglect. So I'm looking at that 16-year-old and I'm seeing a 2-year-old. And it's that kind of difference between social and emotional. So in planning for a visit, I need to know what kind of activities are developmentally appropriate for them. Am I sending a 14-year-old home that's really 9 emotionally? The young lady I talked about, Carrie, who went home for the visit, we discovered that socially she was 11, because we did an assessment on all her kids, and emotionally she was 2 on a good day. So I could talk to her as a 17-year-old BC student, often who looked 30 because she was sexually stylized. And what I was talking to was a 2-year-old. We need to know those things, and we wanted to know it for discipline and other things. It came in handy because we had to figure out a consequence for sneaking in very big, very old, strange men into our house and hiding them overnight. We don't disrupt placements. We never did. Once we said yes, we had to keep you. So we needed to correct that problem. But we realized, somebody said, well, teacher safety. Think of her. You'd have been talking in the wind. Somebody said, well, don't let her leave the house and go to work. She was fabulous at work. She was total success there. Had no other interest. Grounding her didn't do anything. She was too immature. The issue that she was 2 came up when we said, we're putting locks on your doors, or we're taking the locks off your doors. It's not your fault you're sneaking these people in the house at all. You don't know how to make yourself safe. We have to teach you. That's our role as grown-ups while you stay here. So we need to be able to pop your door open at any moment to make sure you're safe. If it happens again, and it did, we'll take the door off the hinges. That's 2 violations of foster care rules. The agency said, if you don't bring her back, you can do anything and we'll shut our eyes. We'll take your door off. Now, tell me any 13-year-old that was typically on target, or 14-year-old, how would they have responded if you said that to them? She said, okay. So again, developmental appropriateness we need to know, because what we may think they should be doing, may look developmentally delayed, and if parents aren't able to understand that or bring it about, it could be a problem in family visits.
And how do you get to assess that? What would be developmental?
Foster parents. What I suggest to all foster parents, and when I was licensing people, that's what I gave you, was a good child development book. So that you can go back and look at the 7-year-old, the 10-year-old, the 12-year-old, and these various ranges that give you generally the child will. And we especially concentrated on good emotional and social information. It's not a test that would get her in an IEP class at school, but it helps you really begin to look at how delayed these kids are. Teenagers, by the way, are all different in those 4 areas, but not nearly to the level our kids are. It's just amazing to me. But again, I think it's important to do that, and a worker who is seeing the child regularly should have some idea of that. Just entering in a conversation with a guardian or a CASA would help you understand what level the child is on. And then we need to also think about the kid's schedule. We don't want them tired. We don't want them worn out. We want them able to respond during the visit and not to be cranky just because they're not feeling good or they're tired. Again, I'm not going to go through these. We talked about these this morning for kinds of visits. This has to be recorded accurately in the planning when people are writing their plans. Again, physical abuse tends to be one that's going to need more structured supervision early on to figure out if it's an education issue or the philosophical commitment. And I won't go through sexual abuse. We've talked about that one. I just wanted to make sure we talked about it. And last but not least, this is one that's come up and we didn't get much on it. We've talked about drug and alcohol. Kids need to see things are not changing with their parents. In the beginning, they need to know that the parent may still be committed to treatment, but treatment hasn't been available to them yet. I don't want to destroy that relationship if there's a potential for change. Besides which, there's enough information and ability now to cover most of, if you're going to have them drop a urine. I always love 3 clean urines and you get to see your child. I am not the drug and alcohol police. Get a grip. And people make us things we aren't. And I don't care if you're a lawyer or a judge or what. I'm a social worker. I'm not a peace specialist. So I don't want to do that. And if they're impaired enough that I notice it, then I'm going to be careful and they're not going to leave with their kids, but it doesn't mean they won't see them. And someone today asked about incarceration. If the plan is for reunification or to keep a relationship alive, absolutely, they need to be seeing their incarcerated parents. People say, oh, that'll make them unhappy. Probably makes the social worker unhappy, person who takes them. Many of our kids have seen their parents involved with, I had a foster daughter, and she went to see her dad every other week in prison. He had been in prison when she was 21. He had been in prison 18 years of her life. Had a bad addiction, and every time he got out on parole, he'd steal beer or drugs, and then he'd get arrested again and go back to jail. So he'd spent all this time in prison. I finally said to her one day, I said, why this thing with your dad? He calls regularly, you talk to him, you go see him. Why is he important in your life? And she said, Norma, the only 2 people in the whole world who've never sexually abused me is Jeff, my husband, and my dad. They're 2 of the good guys. Why wouldn't I want a relationship with them? I would have never known, and I would have thought, why are you going to see him, the man? And to this day, she's in her 30s, and he's out. uses a bit, shall we say. Not a bad guy. He's at all our holidays. And he's really very good to his grandchildren. We need to not run those people off. She's the same kid who told her mother, you can't ever be my mother. So again, we need to think about that as we prepare for it. And with my other kid, his dad was in prison and had killed his mother. And he went to see him every weekend because he was the biggest help in raising that kid of anybody I ever knew. And I wasn't going to lose that resource for any reason. So again, we need to consider that. And if it's reunification, you better keep that alive. Even if it's county jail, if it's an infant or a toddler, we need to be sure parents are having contact.
I gotta take you back to something.
All right.
I have no desire to be a drug constable.
Nah. Aki.
But,
Okay.
okay, well, I gotta look at the flip side. I have a 14-year-old. Mom had stayed clean and sober for a while. She was at one time hopeless. Okay. This stage has been going okay. I don't want to go overnight unless I know for sure Mom's clean and sober. I want a UA.
You
At least
do
I
want.
on some sort of basis to see that she's still staying that way. I don't want to check it on every visit.
Is it going to be only the first time?
Let's talk about that. Should I not be checking her every now and then?
Why?
I'd like her to stay clean and sober. I'd like her not to be high when she's seeing my kid.
Has she been in treatment?
Yeah.
Is she still active?
Okay.
I mean, active with an AA, NA group, or doing anything that supports
So
it?
I don't have anything solid on that, but she is holding down a job. I know the employer. If she wasn't doing the job, she'd be on her ass. So I think she's okay. But I want to know for sure.
And why would you know for sure? Because if she replaces the urine at a drug test,
Right. Yeah, you make an excellent point.
that's the problem. I might ask her, say, I'm nervous. I'm really afraid that something will go wrong and we'll have problems, even if you just get anxious and depressed and use. I'm not going to throw the baby out with the bathwater. Would you want and be willing to do a drug test? Wow, is that different than
We were
saying,
talking about earlier.
yeah,
It's a courtesy thing.
yeah,
Makes sense. Okay.
worth a shot.
Yeah.
Worth a shot. And you're right. I mean, if she's going to work every day and she had a history with crack, she wouldn't be working.
Okay. Yeah.
Another one I always watch is weight loss.
Yeah.
Good and fat is good and fat at that point, you know?
I wasn't here for your earlier sessions, and we mentioned something about, you know, kids who have been taken out of the home who sometimes are very angry and have sort of power issue that they're just really pissed off at their parents. And I have a case like that.
Ah.
And and you said that's something that needs to be worked out not in a therapeutic session. And I'm not really quite sure what alternative you would suggest, because right now in this particular case, you know, visits are not happening. The child is refusing. He's kind of
How old is he?
He's 17. He's oppositional defiant, and the therapy is not.
The world is
going-
oppositional
Right,
defiant.
right. But the therapy sessions are not, or the therapeutic visits are not going very well at all, and he's sort of near aging out of the system, and I'm not quite sure, you know, what.
With
to
him,
expect.
you may have to let it go.
Okay.
But the issue is he seeing mom other places?
No, he's refusing. I mean, that's it.
Then why and what becomes relevant, and I want you to write it down and write it in a letter. Let's talk about, and that's what I meant about not therapy. It's not necessarily therapy, it's social work. It's talking with that kid about what and why, and then can you commit it to a letter, and are you willing to share it? That sometimes is enough for a therapeutic operation for the kid to say, I just needed to get it out and I couldn't face my mom and say it. But I'm furious with you because of this, this, and this. And I have a right to say it out loud. You haven't been a good parent. So giving him that chance might work. I know it's time's up. Any other quick questions? Oh, quick, and then we'll go.
Okay, just real quick, along the same lines, 14-year-old wrote the letter, doesn't want to see mom, has some issues with suicidal ideation, not seeing mom anywhere else. Mom's attorney files a motion for specific
what was the long-term plan? What is the plan for this kid? He's 14.
We haven't done the plan yet. We haven't hit dispo yet.
I,
But I think the department wants to do a unification. I'm the JL, I'm saying no. I think it needs to be a guardianship. I don't think this kid's gonna wanna
how
go.
long has he been in care?
It started out as uncontrolled and then was switched to a 3A once we got more information.
How long has he been in care?
About 6 months.
Oh, Jesus. I'm used to 30 days max allowed. It makes a big difference if you get that dispo quick. The issue for me would be, he's 14, I may sit down with a therapist face to face and say, what are we going to do here? I'm ready to go with a guardianship or some other family member. And I would think as a worker, I'd start talking to the worker or talking to him about where else he would live.
And we've been doing
And get some good information on where this kid needs to be. What's the history? Miserable? Awful? Then get over it. Not you, them.
that. Yeah, locks on the interior, locks on the doors, can't get out of the house.
Yeah, that's pretty egregious.
Yeah.
So,
Stepfather physically abusive, mother not protected.
gee, I'd be so excited to go back there. It would be really hard not
Well,
to.
yeah, and we don't understand why he doesn't want to go back
Yeah.
there, but mom has some mental health issues, and, her attorney's doing what she needs to do.
Yeah, and I would definitely say the agency needs to put up or shut up. They need to go do what they need to do to move it out. Yeah. Thank you guys. You've been all wonderful.